All right, so come on now. For today's agenda, we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about Payroll 2.0, what's new in Payroll 2.0. We'll also talk to a point about what to expect when we do the data conversion, and that includes the setup overviews, how the tax table updates currently work, impacts to Crystal reports, and then how to help you get ready to prepare for doing an upgrade. We will also be doing an online review of the new module, so we'll get into that towards the end. The first chunk of this, however, is to go through in detail a lot of the new features in the system. So let me get that little thing out of the way. Payroll module has been updated by Sage, and in doing so, they brought it to what they call the new business platform. The new business platform allows us now to see tables that are much more human readable friendly. Instead of being some code PR01, PR02, they actually are PR employee, they are PR tax history. I mean, they're all sorts of different things. They're much more readable and understandable. Sage also has now made it a payroll module available in Sage 100 Premium. Used to only be available in Standard and Advanced. Because of the significant changes made to payroll, Sage is actually doing versioning for payroll as a standalone version number. So if we take a look, this is called Payroll 2.0. Payroll 2.0 is available in version 2018, but as they have new changes and modifications, they can release the updates to payroll only without us requiring a complete update to the entire 2018 implementation. The Crystal Reports version has also changed. So with release of Sage 100 2018, they've gone to a new version of Crystal. So there are some changes that are involved there, but for most everybody, that won't be a large impact. However, since the payroll module has been rewritten and new tables are involved, the table names for any of your custom reports will obviously have changed. So we do need to make sure we set aside time to review with you which custom reports you actively use, and then go ahead and scope it out so that we can re-architect them and get them in place for your test environment. Anybody who is currently using TimeCard, you need to understand that that is no longer compatible with the current version of payroll. A large change is that the tax tables are no longer going to be downloaded from the Sage website onto your systems. You need an always-on connection when you're processing payroll, because the payroll tax tables are now actually stored on Sage's site and directly accessed by the system. So it is a cloud-based integration. Data is not brought down locally onto your machine anymore. One of the other data entry features that has been modified to bring it to the new business platform, if you're familiar with any of the other modules, you have a choice when you do your data entry. Do I do data entry in batches or just direct entry? Batching allows you to group and organize your information across periods or by user, whatever your workflow requires. Now that capability is in the system. We'll definitely touch on that. There's also significantly increased security in and around payroll to keep the payroll solution Sage offers compliant with ongoing federal and state requirements for security. So one of them is department. We'll go into all the different security features and review that with you. Payroll history. Retaining payroll history now defaults to 4 years because of ACA. There's also some enhanced functionality in and around memo codes, so we'll touch that as well. I'm just going to go move along unless anyone raises a hand in the chat box. So I am not going to sit through this. There are a very large number of slides. I'm going to recap just briefly on each one so that we can go through it in timely order. If you have any more detailed information you want to dig out, we can come back to it, or you can read through the document. So this basically recaps for you what we were just describing. You can actually do batch entry in the system. When you do batch entry in the system, it allows you to sort and organize your data, but there are some limitations. For example, you can't merge or renumber batches or transfer from one batch to another when you're in payroll. There are some enhanced features. The data grids are now in place. So if you remember what the old grids used to, what the old screens used to look like, you have a top and bottom entry section. You now have a grid which is much more in line with all the other modules. And with that capability comes the ability to move fields around as with everything else. There are also calendar buttons, and there goes my voice. hyperlinks to let you move around and drill down into the system more readily, provided you have security rights to do so. There's a memo maintenance functionality. Memos have now actually been set up in the system so that you can do all of your memo maintenance directly there at the employee level. They are split up into 3 sections. You have employee memo maintenance, you have payroll, and I think there's a history one as well. I was just looking for it on here. But access to those memos, how they display, when they display, all that now has much more significant controls, and those controls are defined down in the payroll module itself, not just up in Library Master under roles, which are system-wide permissions. Okay, payroll options. If we go down into that, which we certainly will, we're going to go through in detail all of the different features that are down in the payroll options where we do the configuration. These is just a quick list of what has been added, removed, or modified. This continues down that. So there's information in here. There are some things that we will push very hard to make sure that you keep. One of them is this one here, retain perpetual history. That has to be left on. If it's not left on, then we're not keeping the history that we need for some of our reporting. There's other options available to us. As you go through it, you'll also find that the help functionality that was added into the system throughout all the other modules, same capabilities now exist when you open up help in the payroll module. Let's keep rolling. This is about the additional tab. Yeah, these are all your setups. Okay. One of the setup changes that we're going to pay a little more attention to is the time off tab. It used to be called benefit accruals. It now has its own tab with some options in there that we'll cover in more detail. We'll actually show you that online. But the effective impact of this is that the layout is a little bit different. The capabilities, however, are still the same. So benefits still work the way they have. All right, when we get into payroll and we do the entry is now modified. Some of the fields were moved, so some of them have actually been moved onto the additional tab. It makes the layout of the screens far more intuitive than they had been before. It also gives us the ability to add in user-defined fields and other functions that we want to without fighting for real estate. Payroll options history tab. That again is going to go to the history. Somebody's got a calculator going. Can whoever that is mute themselves? The history, by definition, is going to be saved for a minimum of 4 years. Again, we strongly recommend you consider bumping up that number unless you have a space constraint, and even then we'll talk about how you can use the backup companies to keep the extra data. Deduction code maintenance. Yes, ma'am.
Tina Cox is asking a question. She asked, will the changes in Crystal Reports change our payroll check format?
Yes, it changed. The payroll check format is still an option where you can pick check sub, subject tab, any format that you wish, but we do have to actually touch your customized payroll forms. So if you were doing checks and or direct deposit form printing, those do have to be retouched to point to the new tables and do the processing the same way. Tina, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Good question. Yep, I gotcha. All right. So deduction codes has now been expanded up to 6 characters, so is its descriptor. A new field has been added. This is important to understand. Apply to W-2 is a checkbox that's been added, and then you can actually specify whether this should be applied to box 12 or 14 on the W-2 form. This will automatically work with your Atrix integration when you do your quarterly reports and your year-end. There are significant overhauls to how the tax rules work. Sage has built into the system a 3-level tax function. There are tax rules, there are tax groups, and there are tax, what's the third one? It just popped out of my head. We'll go through them. So the tax rules allow us to define how the functionality in Sage will work for a given tax rule. When I open this up towards the end of the presentation, I will show you Sage has the tax rules predefined. You have to actually pick which tax rule applies for each of the earning codes that you are using, or the deduction code if you have a deduction. The tax rules themselves only really need to be set up with respect to deductions if you're going to be doing anything that's a Section 125 or pre-tax. Other than that, the tax rules themselves need to be applied to the individual earnings codes to make sure that those calculations work as expected. With the implementation, with your implementation, Sage has delivered a new company code. The company code is PR2. If you are all familiar with your ABC and XYZ companies, they're sample data companies that Sage gives us. PR2 is chock full of all of our payroll information. One of the things that we have requested from Sage and are still waiting to get is a detailed description of how each of the tax rules work. What are their impacts? How do they roll up to the employee record and up to the general ledger? Once we get that information, we'll certainly share it with everybody. In the meantime, what we have been able to do is identify most of the codes are in PR2 company. We use those earning codes there to tie back to whatever earning codes you have in your system, and we align them before we do our testing. Of course, we're always going to do very thorough testing with you to make sure that all of the taxes are processing as expected and then rolling up into the general ledger as appropriate. There are tax rules now for dependent care and non-qualified plans. We'll see those as well. Department maintenance, we did talk about it being expanded. The department numbers have some specific rules in and around them, like you can no longer include special characters. So if that is the case, we're going to have to actually map them to something different. There are also deduction and security tabs that have been added to the system. We'll go and actually show you what that looks like. Basically, if you have more than one person doing your payroll data entry, you can control at a department level what information that employee who is doing your payroll can actually see. There are also expense account fields that have been added, the employer disability and employer other. All right, let's move. We're actually going to go through this department detail and the security in detail when we go online. This I'll let you read in detail. If you want to read it afterwards, we can go through that. The earning code maintenance has also been expanded. The description field's been expanded. There's another box that has been applied. It was the apply to box 14 for the W-2, same concept. There are some other changes that have happened. The exclusion of the ALE report checkbox is now in place of earnings to exclude. There are tax rule fields that have to be applied. If the tax rule is not applied to the earning code, then when you go to do your payroll run, Sage does not know what tax rule to use and taxes will not be calculated. So we'll spend time figuring out why that happens and then go, oh, yep, we have to add in the tax rule. That actually is right there. Tax rules are not company specific. However, when you go into a given company code and you define for each earning code what tax rule you are using, when you do it the first time, Sage put together a small utility that asks you at the time you're doing it, hey, I found this same earning code in the following other companies. Would you like me to automatically apply it to those? For all of you who currently have multiple backup company codes for your payroll, this is significant. Each company has to be converted separately. And because it is converted separately, the setup of this additional detail when we first migrate you into the new payroll system has to be set up as well. So when we actually go and build it out in the first one and the system asks us, would we like to copy all the other companies that have this same earning code? So long as your earning codes are consistent, which they should be, given it's a history copy of your system, well, it's a very good idea to use that utility. It will certainly speed up the implementation for the upgrade.
Hey, Sharon?
Yes, ma'am.
We have another question. Is there an option to have the payroll period added in the payroll data entry process and printed on the checks or pay stub?
You can always have the payroll period printed on the checks and the pay stub. That is not something that is specific to this upgraded version. It has been a feature that we can make available. With respect to crystal reports, we effectively can print pretty much anything. So the answer is yes, but it is not specific to Payroll 2.0.
Thank you.
That person's question? Beautiful. In the workers' comp maintenance, it's just a relabeling function. That's pretty small. Time off benefits. When we open up the benefits module, you'll see they're called time off types. It's just a labeling thing, so they're trying to get to a little more industry standard layout of the software with the industry standard naming conventions. You actually get to define what you're going to use. The benefit 1, benefit 2, benefit 3 options are now time off 1, 2, and 3. You can actually name them. So it's vacation, sick, and then you get to pick what you want for the third one. You can call it payroll, you can call it personal, it's whatever you wish. That information then rolls up forward. Let's go. Calculations for the time off register. There is a 3-decimal precision function in the system. This was called the benefits register. Obviously, everything that was benefits is now called time off. And it calculates your accruals. The system will automatically do the rounding, so we need to make sure that when we do the validation, if you are using these, that we end up with the correct numbers. This is one of the things that we'll have on our upgrade checklist for you. Calculation of payroll taxes. Because you're setting up the you're no longer setting up the tax tables locally because you step into that through your direct connection to Sage in the cloud. The system will automatically calculate all of that information for you, leaving it far more timely and effective. The task itself, that is the tax calculation, tax table maintenance itself, has actually been dropped off the list because it's no longer applicable. We'll go into the detail where you can see how you actually enter your company-specific information. So for anybody in California, if you have your SUTA and FUTA, the government will send, or the state will send that information to you. When you put that information in, we'll see in a moment that that is actually specific to the company that you're plugging it into, and that you need to do the same for any backup companies if you're going to be doing reporting out of there. The new tax calculation engine, the actual tax rates themselves are, like I said, stored in the cloud. That makes them not specific to any given company. So when you run the payroll tax calculation, the system's actually going online, pulling the tax rates, doing all the math for you, and bringing it back. That means that you have to have an always-on internet connection. What else is there in here? I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay. If you run the tax calculation on the server on a workstation, it does make a difference to the system how you're doing it. We have to tell it whether we're choosing to run the tax calculation on the server or not. If you can't reach it online, there is an issue with that. The program will automatically process it against the workstation. Tax profile maintenance is where we start grouping these things. You can actually create tax profiles that consist of one or more tax locations, and those have their associated tax groups. So it's a hierarchy, much like we've seen in sales tax, where you define sales tax codes, and then you combine them to create schedules, and those schedules are applied. This same hierarchical concept is applied in the payroll module. Tax profiles are system-wide, so you don't have to actually create them more than once. We will review them one time at the time we do the upgrade with you. And then in tax profile maintenance, you have to have all of the companies set up in Sage 100. So if we're bringing over your data, and that includes historical companies, we'll convert them long before we actually go through the individual configuration so that it can be applied system-wide. If you are using payroll departments, you will also have to have permissions to access that detail in the payroll department level. Again, that's going to be defined in the payroll module, not in roles maintenance. Tax group setups. The tax group setups are used to maintain the tax ID, the GL account number, and then remember what I mentioned earlier, SUTA and FUTA, things that are specific to your company, you're going to have to plug in on a company-by-company level. They are not going to be maintained in the Sage Tax Engine, which is hosted in the cloud, because they clearly are specific to you. The tax group records are company-specific, so we'll talk about that where we set up the separate tax IDs, account, and tax rates. The tax rules, this is a piece I mentioned earlier. This is what Sage has predefined for us, and it is what we then turn around and apply to earning codes, and then for any deduction codes if it's applicable for that given deduction. There are other taxes that can be added into the system. The fields are available for tax groups that include jurisdictions with taxes that are not itemized anywhere else. Employee maintenance. Okay, so employee maintenance had a facelift, and in there are now 5 tabs that have been added. We're going to actually go through that and look, but some things of note. The employee's last name is now larger. It can be up to 40 characters, and the first name has been expanded to 25. The employee's middle name and so on have been added. So that's kind of nice. It used to be your first name initial had to be in your first name. There's a lot of information in here. I'm not going to pick through this. I think it would be more helpful to let you see when we go online. But when we do get to it, some of the things I do want to touch on, understand that these have been moved to the additional tab. The sort of the marital status, sex, and emergency, all that information has been moved. It's not lost. Let's see. You also have code options for how you want to categorize, and those are optional. You can actually pick, I think, not disclosed, I think, is one of them as well. This is some extra information that's been added into the system and moved. Emergency contacts now is up to 2. I think it was only 1 before. Employee maintenance benefits, we did talk about that, but there's some additional information. Eligibility date, yay, everyone's been waiting for that. Medical coverage and effective dates, and then the last date reset. But these 2 in particular is something that everybody's been waiting for, so we should be excited about that. Pension plan and profit sharing checkbox. You can actually use the arrow at the top right corner of the window to select that information and then click into benefits to access it. Taxes tab, we talked about this a little bit. We're going to go back into that and we'll show you. You can actually access one or more tax profiles, and you can do this at the employee level if applicable. If not applicable at the employee level, we'll allow the groups to default over the employee. So if you do need to override, you have the capability of overriding at the employee level. This is important for those people who have that functionality. It is more detail that we have to touch when we do your upgrade, and we have to be very careful to be thorough so that when we do the tax, when we actually do a dry payroll run, that we actually calculate all the taxes out and validate them. It's important to realize what is actually driving the tax calculation if you've assigned it at the employee level. Pay default tab is there. Most of this remains. It's actually called the wages tab now, but all of the information that we're used to seeing you will still see there. Earning tab has been replaced. The earnings and vacation windows is now on the main, an earning button that is, was on the main tab is now its own tab. So I think this is all, again, yeah, these are all navigation. The basic idea is your data is still there. If you want to look at what the layout is, we'll see that in a few minutes. Where am I on time? I am good on time. All right. Employee maintenance deductions tabs. This, again, is going to be the same type of layout as with the earning code, deduction code. The same information is presented. But we actually can view by drilling down where we didn't have drill down capabilities anymore. You have additional drill down capabilities. Pay history tab as well. There's a secondary list box that shows employee year-to-date totals. The drill down in these is phenomenal. We can actually drill down without having to run reports, whereas we used to have to run reports to get to the more detailed level, including the tax breakdown for the individual against their history. Anyone who's doing reconciling the hard, long way with those reports, you'll love that feature. Employee maintenance, the tax summary, this is what I was just talking about, the drill down into this area. You can open benefits as well to get into that detail, as looking at what their current benefits are, and then also whether or not they, you can do the participation in pension plans, profit sharing. You also have the drill down into the history, time worked, and so on. So you have quarter-to-date, year-to-date hours, etc. Employee inquiry has been added, so that's kind of nice. And again, inquiry by definition is view only. You can create checks in PDF format through Paperless Office module. So if you want to generate those PDF files, you no longer have to save them out manually. It's a natural part of the Paperless Office workflow and will be automatically associated with the employee if you're using Paperless Office to deliver those documents to your employees. In forms maintenance, this is what the modifications have been. So in forms maintenance, there's a checkbox, a check option, sorry, for the documents list so that we can actually process those. The employee viewer tab has been added so that employees can actually go in and review that information, including an employee self-service. So employees going in who are doing a view of all payroll have to have access to the payroll module, and it's going to have an additional level of control at the department level, which we touched on earlier. Individual employees can use the self-service button. If they have access to Sage, they can go into employee self-service, and because they are looking up themselves alone, they can find that information. They can't access anybody else. Pay cycle windows, you'll see that in a minute. It's been modified a little bit. So we have this, the check date must be entered on the check printing window, but the period start date has been added to the window. Depending on the cycle that you pick, it can auto-calculate the ending dates. The tabs button has been removed, and you can't pay a combination of pay cycles in one check run. So if I'm trying to do a semi-monthly and I actually list it as bi-weekly, it will stop me and say can't actually mix and match those. Payroll data entry have a large number of modifications. Again, I want to make sure we don't run out of time. I want to get you into the system and let you see it, and then also open it up for Q&A. So we're going to talk about some of the new features in there as we actually go through. There's one of the things that we definitely love is the recalculations button has been added above the primary grid line, so it replaces the recalc deductions button that used to be down at the bottom. The line details grid is also far more flexible, so we can sort and organize our data. It includes a lot of the new fields that you will actually need to see to make sure that you've got all your data incorrect, including the tax profile code. So that's going to be in lieu of seeing your state and local tax fields. All right. Check printing, we talked about. Tina raised the point, what do I do about my existing checks? They will have to be retouched. And the same thing with your direct deposit forms. We'll get into, this is a little more technical. It's really if you want to understand how to do the setups of those, but we'll certainly work with you and walk you through that. Processing direct deposits. The direct deposit menu has changed. The functionality is still there. So the layout of how we get the direct deposits to work, if your system's already set up for it, then this information that's on the screen at the moment is really not relevant because it will translate nicely when we do the upgrade. Nonetheless, we will certainly make sure that we do a dry run, generate that direct deposit file, test it against your bank's website, and make sure that everything is working as it's supposed to. Reports, registers, and forms. Obviously, with the re-architecting of the payroll module, Sage has done a lot of work in re-architecting the reports themselves, not only to make them more user-friendly, but also to stay compliant with reporting requirements. There is something called a personally identifiable information, a PII number. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but the PII basically limits us in what information we can pull out of Sage unless we have specific permissions to access that data. This allows us to then limit the amount of information that gets automatically pulled in when you run a report. You actually have to drag the PII table into your report to give the report the ability to pull extra information. So we'll talk about that. The check history report, same as before, it will show everything, your earnings, deductions, taxes, direct deposit details. It also includes information that was on perpetual history. So because it now does that, you will no longer find the perpetual history report in your system. Many of us have used that extensively. So you're going to actually be using your check history report. If you require, as always, any changes to that report, we can certainly work with you and create versions of it that you can access through the report settings lookup button. And we can create as many of them as you need. The perpetual deduction history and the consolidated are now in a single report. Same thing there, so streamlining the reporting process for you, and the modifications to the menu as well. Pension plan register, you can actually print the register from the main menu instead of having to actually dig down to grab it. Report manager, we can add in reports, but this is what we were talking about a moment ago. Because the system is more restrictive in permissions, keeping your employees' information secured, unless you bring in the PII work table, unless you include that in the report, name, email, home address, phone number are all no longer going to print on regular documents. So if we want them in, we have to actually add that extra table in, making it available for the report to use. If you want any additional information on that, or to see what the government currently considers PII-related table or field, you can look at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, go on their website, and they will keep that list there current for you. SAGE continues to make sure that as they build product and modify the payroll module, they stay compliant with the Homeland Security requirements. Any questions so far? Danica, we're good? Okay.
Like it.
Okay. Federal and state e-filing. This has been combined into one, obviously, so the following changes have been made into one report, into one task window. The selection buttons and so on. It's basically emulating the consolidation that SAGE has done inside the payroll module. You'll find when we go to do the federal and state e-filing, that same information does. So, for example, you're going to find that the earnings and deduction codes on the W-2 forms have been removed. Instead, what we're going to be using is we're using the apply to box 14 and W2 on W-2s, and the either 12 or 14 in the apply to W-2 box for the deductions. So the earnings and deductions are now using those checkboxes that have been added into the system. So long as they are configured properly, it will roll directly into all of the reporting. There also is additional security. The email address entered in the employee maintenance is used for sending those tax forms. You don't actually have to set that up in Paperless Office anymore. For anyone who had been using Paperless Office, we actually had to specify the employee address information there if you are in the employee records. If you are using departments, you have to have access to those departments to be able to run these federal and state e-filing reports. If you don't, then somebody else has to, or we'll have it set up so that somebody who is a manager and can do all of them can run them at once. Period end processing. Period end processing, whether you choose quarter end or year end, is no longer there. Year end processing happens automatically. This is a big deal. We do want to make sure that you understand, although SAGE has been telling everybody that the requirement to create backup companies is no longer there, RKL is actively doing testing on this to find out exactly what, if anything, we might lose if we don't create a backup company. So, for example, if I needed to run my quarterlies and I've run out of time, if I don't create my backup company, am I still able to run the quarterlies or not? And even so, how does that impact me with respect to changes in tax tables? So Lynette is doing a yeoman's job of doing the testing on that for us. As soon as we get the final answers on some of these, we'll certainly share it with everybody. I'm expecting that we should be able to get this to everyone by this time next Friday. So unless anybody says otherwise, I'll go ahead and assume everyone would like to be updated with this information. It is a big deal. So if your name is on this list, we'll make sure that we send an email to you by not later than next Friday, since we are approaching the end of quarter one. If you have any doubt, go ahead and create the backup company for quarter one. It takes nothing to remove it if later on you decide you don't want it, but if in turn you end up needing it, it's certainly a good idea to have. That said, SAGE does say that we don't have to create the backup company anymore. We just want to know for sure. So we're going to do some more testing. Only consolidate. I'll let you guys read through this at your leisure. If we're going to be doing the period end processing, there's obviously all the reports that will be generated, and when we generate those reports, they are going to roll over to Paperless Office if you have that turned on. Again, if you don't have access to a given department, when you run these reports, those reports will automatically exclude the departments to which you do not have access. ACA is still in play. Basic functionality has not really changed per se that I'm aware of. Lynette, please jump in here if I have missed anything on ACA, but as far as I'm aware, ACA is still the same workflows, so I don't think anything there is changing. Is that correct?
Lynette? That is correct.
Thanks.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I got you.
Oh, okay.
Payroll changes in Business Insights. There was some workforce statistics information that used to be displayed in the Business Insights dashboard. For those people who were using the dashboard, if you were actually using the workforce statistics feature, you'll see that that's not available anymore, just from a security standpoint, employee information security. Service notification maintenance. This is important. All of you who are the keepers of the keys for payroll, Sage needs to know who you are so that they can send you updated information periodically, like there's an update available or any other kind of notification. They need your email on file. When you signed up with Sage originally, the part of setting up your account with them was in their portal to define who does Sage reach out to when they send notifications. Because Sage 100 Payroll works as its own its own standalone revisionable module, so to speak, they want a separate email account defined so that when there's something specific to just payroll, they can notify you. So we'll certainly touch on that. Payroll Setup Wizard. You all already set up with payroll, but if you were a new implementation, then there used to be no wizard for this. Now there is. This gives us a list of renamed and removed tasks. We have bigger fish to fry, so we're just going to move on. You certainly are welcome to look at this in detail afterwards. All right, let's talk about data conversion. After upgrading to Sage 100, we actually, I mentioned it earlier, have to convert each company one at a time. If you are a client that has a large number of historical company codes, when we set you up, what we will do is we'll convert your live data first, make sure everything there is configured properly. We'll bring over your company codes at the time you're ready to go live. Before we do that, we'll also bring over your historical, but by that time we'll have figured out all of the mapping of all the data fields and everything else. It will increase the amount of time it takes to complete this, so we will work with you for those of you who want to tackle converting the the historical companies and setting up that configuration on your own. We'll help walk you through it. For the most part, we're finding clients are asking us to take care of this as a part of the upgrade. So it will be scoped in your statement of work. This way you understand exactly how many companies we're touching and what level of work is involved. When we go through the conversion process, there is a specific wizard that Sage has created which will actually walk us through a large portion of it. This details it. It will change to part numbers that contain special characters. It tries to map your existing tax codes to the appropriate tax groups, presents that information on screen, and will let us know if any one of them is blank. It lets us know that. We can actually fill it in right there. It'll allow you to create your tax profile during this conversion process. It also has a new filing status, so for anything it recognizes, it will automatically default it, show you that information. For anything it does not recognize, you can go in and say what it should be using. There's also a missing employee listing. Knock on wood, I haven't found a need for this yet, but the system will let us know if it finds something in history that is there, but we no longer have an employee record in employee maintenance. We'll know that. There's a pre-migration tax code listing. Gives us everything that's going to be mapped to the tax groups and tax profile when converting the data. We also will have to retouch any import jobs. For those of you who are doing any import or export jobs, if we're doing those jobs, again, the tables underneath have changed. Because the tables underneath have changed, the import jobs themselves also have to be modified. I think Lynette has done a couple payroll upgrades, as have I, and we found that it's actually not too bad once we understand some of the changes. One of the biggest things we found is your employee ID is now in place of your employee number. Employee number has traditionally been department-employee number. That still remains in the system, but what uniquely identifies a record in Sage in employee is now called your employee ID. It is a Sage-generated, system-maintained ID, and so anything that we're doing with reporting or importing of data, etc., has to take that into consideration because that is the key across which all tables tie back to the employee record. And we did touch on crystal reporting, so we're good there. Sidebar. For anybody who has been keeping up with what's been going on with the feds, there are tax reform changes that are coming out. It is not our place to provide tax consulting recommendations to anybody, but if you want, RKL has created a website page, a blog, that walks through this is what we found, and here's some calculators that are out there so that you can send this to your employees. With those tax changes, people are looking for increases in what their net pay looks like, which could potentially create a problem for them if they're no longer withholding enough. So that it would be smart maybe to share with your employees a link that allows them to review what their settings are now in the new environment and what that tax rate impact is going to be to them given the new tax rates. This is applicable to Payroll 2.0. It's also applicable to the old because the new tax rates are in play in the old as well. So if you want to, go to this site. This is the RKL website, and read that document, share with your employees that information so that they have a little bit of a running start on whether or not their new withholdings are adequate given what their personal situations are. Okay, so last but not least, before I jump into the system, as Danica mentioned, you have two customer advocates. We have Mike Sherr, who handles all of the clients here on the West Coast, and Gia Lane, who handles everybody who's on the East Coast. I think our Mississippi is where we make the division, but in any case, their contact information is here. You should feel free to reach out to them at any time. We should probably add to this slide the ability to reach out to our support team. It's support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, at rklesolutions.com. We always have a dedicated team watching the support queue, responding to those requests for assistance, and certainly we'll schedule you with a consultant if you're interested in doing something like an upgrade. We'll help you with that. All right, so before I jump into the system, any questions? Going once, going twice? Nothing? Okay. I'm going to jump into Sage. Can everybody see the Sage window? Danica, Lynette, you guys want to tell me you can see this?
Yep, looks good.
Yes, looks good.
All right.
I don't see a Sage
So
window.
I mentioned earlier, I'm sorry? Okay, so I mentioned earlier that Sage delivers with this version a sample company. It's called Payroll 2 Demo. You can see it down here on the bottom left. That's what I'm going to be working in. We're just going to go ahead and jump right in. This is the new look and feel. You can still use the old modules too, but for payroll, we're just going to stay current. Now, warning, no users set up to receive notifications for the tax engine. Let's take a look at what that means. So we've left a lot of this available so that you can see what prompts you're going to get. It's quite deliberate. We want you to see what we have to do. So we have to go down into Service Notification Maintenance. Sage realizes I've not told them who it is that I want to send those notifications to. And before it will let me go any further, I really need to take care of that housekeeping. So under Setup, there is Service Notification Maintenance, and you can come in here and plug that in. Before I do that, anytime I start opening a payroll-related window, Sage runs out and checks to see, hey, is there an update available for me or not? So if there's a tax update, it wants to download the pieces that it needs in here for the linking. I can say yes or no. For the sake of time right now, I'm just going to go ahead and say no, but it would be in your best interest to seriously consider doing yes, unless you're in a rush and need to get something out the door ASAP. It only takes a moment to run. So let's go down into Service Notification Management. Oh, I have it open, I'm sorry. Come on, where are you? There you are. So what I need to do is I need to come down here and add it in. Sage needs the email address. Why are you not letting me add it in? Oh, because I have it twice. There we go. So I have to go in here and add myself in, so I'm just going to say Dave is available to do it. If in your user maintenance you have an email address set up, you can plug that in. So use email address dave@bigcompany.com. Come on, dave@bigcompany.com. You can have one or many people to use. You can define them. Right now I'm doing this as an alternate because that user didn't have one. But if I actually have one in here, let's do, this is a sample database as well, so we're going to do solutions.com. Now it'll send notifications, and I can actually have it send notifications to multiple people. I would strongly suggest you put in no less than 2, because if somebody's out on vacation and you have somebody else handling payroll for you, they need to be notified if there's something going on. So we'll say OK to that. And now with that in place, let's take a look at payroll options and take a look at some of the changes that are in here. So this should look familiar to most everybody. Okay? There's not a lot that has changed here. We allow multiple tax profiles or not in the data entry side. So if you have employees that are working in different states, you can actually set up multiple tax profiles or not. Do you or don't you require local tax reporting, and so on. So it's going to go through this. We'll actually walk you through all of this information so that you feel comfortable with it. We want to make sure at the time we are ready to deploy the test environment for you to do your testing that you already understand how all of this works. As always, Sage provides help. So if you want, you can click on this button down here on the bottom right, and it will give you information. Okay? Let's look at time off. So this is where the time off function resides. And as we talked about earlier, you actually get to define the labels. So instead of it being benefits, it's now time off. That information will be displayed when we get into the benefits now time off section. We'll see that momentarily. Data entry screens, pretty much the same. Direct deposit as well. There is a direct deposit service that you can use if you want to use that with Sage. That's optional. And then history. Again, remember your minimum for history is going to be 4 years. Strongly suggest you consider doing up to 99. You also can track, if you're not already doing this, even though this has been a feature available, we want to make sure that if you make a change to an employee, do you want to track that change? What employee information did you change? Deletion, addition, modification, or all of it? And then when you do, you can choose to track it in detail or not. Tracking it in detail is not something that you and I have control over. It's whatever Sage has determined detail means. They'll add that extra information into the report. You can then run your payroll reports, and when you get down into the reporting, you'll see there's an employee audit. So there it is down here. You run the employee audit report, and it will provide that information. All right. Let's take a look at earning codes. Inside earning codes, this is where tax rules are going to be applied. These tax rules are predefined by Sage. Again, we are waiting to get the documentation. It's a very popular request right now for Sage to provide this to everybody. So they are working on getting us a very detailed list of what each one of these does. Because we don't actually have the functional details that we would like to see, in the meantime, what we do is we work with you to actually go through and do a lookup. And in here, everyone's used to functionality in Sage for creating lookups and modifying them. So if I come down here and I add in my tax rule field, I now have a window that presents to me for my hourlies, Sage is recommending we use this one. For my overtime, Sage is recommending we use this one. And I actually use this to check what we set against in your system and make sure they align. If they don't align, then we make some phone calls and find out, is this the correct one or not? We also can go through the system and do some testing. All right, so let's move on. I think, Lynette, is there anything? Oh, here's the apply to box 14 on W-2. That's something to include, and whether or not I want to exclude this from the lookup report. All right, so accept. Very important to know that. Deductions, same thing here. If a deduction has a tax rule because it's either Section 125 or a pre-tax, you certainly can do so, but deductions, generally speaking, we're not going to have to worry about that. I think from a deduction standpoint, that's probably what we want. Don't forget, you always can use the apply function. That also remains. Let's take now a look at department maintenance. This is important because until you have everything defined, you need to understand one thing. This is some text that Sage has put up here at the top. Please don't bypass it. Read it carefully. If you don't list anybody in here, so if no users are selected, all users who have access to payroll can touch this department and anyone in that department. So it is very important that we make sure we have all the users listed who should be able to touch it, or if you only have one person or two people doing payroll and they should be able to see everybody, please leave this blank. Any questions? Okay. Under deductions and earnings, you can define your accrual account. And then there's the main, which you're already used to. This information's here. And obviously this says time off accruals instead of benefits. Same thing as just a label change. All right, let's look at tax profile maintenance. Part of the wizard when you run through the system conversion process, part of the tax profile maintenance is to default this for you and then help you go through and review what the location types are with it. So you can define work, residence, both, or none. The defaults in the system so far, as I've seen, and Lynette, you chime in if you see otherwise, actually have mapped out very nicely. We've done a couple of California and Nevada clients, and it's worked out well. So no issues, no changes there. All right, close that. Tax profile maintenance, I just did that one. Tax groups. Tax group setup. Important to understand how tax group setups work. For a given tax group setup, this is where you have your tax ID and your tax rates. And if there are any things that are specific to you and your company, you can define them at this point. Anything that is specifically defined at the company level is retained here. The Sage portal does not keep track of that tax rate information. So for anybody who's California, your pseudo, your FUTA, you're going to get notification from the state. You'll plug that information in. All right, labor code.
I just want to say one more thing on that part. A lot of clients in the past have always put in ETT to accrue for ETT. ETT for California is going to be calculated on the back end through Sage, so you no longer have to add in that little extra %.
Outstanding, thank you. Time off maintenance, fairly straightforward. Same functionality is here, but the labels that you see are going to be driven by the setup configuration. Other than that, the processing is still the same. And obviously the taxes are going to play into it. There's also Puerto Rico and memo maintenance. Memo maintenance one we definitely have to touch. During the setup function here, this is where we actually have to decide what access you have to which thing. So employee inquiry, employee maintenance, payroll data entry, what should I be able to do, and who should be able to do it. So you actually pick a role. When you pick a role, you're pulling a role from your Sage roles as defined up in Library Master. So until you do set this up, when you go into, let's say, employee maintenance, and you notice there's no memo button there, what's going on, it's because you don't have permissions. And if you tell me, wait a minute, I'm set up as a Sage administrator, I should be able to see everything, this level of permission has been driven down into the payroll module so that we have an extra layer of control. Okay? So very important that we set that up. If you have memos, they are not lost, but they will not be visible until you have permissions granted. Let's go take a look at employee maintenance. So employee maintenance, there we go. We have Lady Ann. You have your basic layout of information. We talked about some of the new fields that are here. Additional information, these drop downs, what options you have available to you. Gender and ethnicity, easy for me to say, and there it is. There's my not reported. I knew it was there. Okay. You also have other things, veterans. You have the ability to have us add in extra information. I know several of you are trying to track things like driver's license information or certification information. Those things can be added into the payroll module now with much more ease than they had been before then. We can take a look at benefits. Benefits used to be a button. Now it's a tab. And once you get in here, you can see and manage this data, obviously assuming you have access to this person in this department. There are time off codes. Again, instead of having to leave here, go down into setup and open it up, because it now is on the new business platform, you can directly jump from here into time off code maintenance, pull up that one and work on it. Same as with all the other modules inside Sage. That's a big yay. Taxes. You can actually get in here and see taxes, and then as you scroll, you can see whether or not there's a W-2 consent, a 1095 consent. If you have any questions about them, you can, oops, did not mean to uncheck that. Come on, there we go. If you have any questions about any of these fields, as we talked about before, help is always available. If you press F1, F1 is context-sensitive help, so it will open up the help file, bring us to that field, and have you actually take a look at it and see what is the one I'm after and what does it do. So there's very detailed documentation available now, and it is very simple to access. Pay defaults. So if we go into the pay defaults, you can actually set up pay defaults for your employees. You can define the labor codes, etc. You can also do what we've done before with the auto earnings. Again, there's information displayed over here on the right, so you can move around. And it's the same functionality, it's just laid out slightly different. So if you're using this feature, there's no learning curve involved, it's just a different look. I'm on pay default. Let's go to earnings. Here's your earnings history. If I want to actually dig into something now, I can drill into it, The dead giveaway that I know I can drill into it is I have an icon here, so I can either click on that and open up my earnings detail, or I can double click on the row. Again, same as in every other module in Sage. If there's drill down capability, just simply double click. And so it gives me an on-screen presentation of that information. Deductions. This breaks down my deductions. Again, if I want to go down into the detail on the deduction, I can do so and see that information there. Pay history breaks down my pay history, obviously. As you go through this detail, there's extra information here. I don't think there was drill down on this. There is not drill down on this one, so that's fine. But you get to the reporting history nonetheless. It's right in front of you. You have all this information, and then if you want, you can run the check history report, which replaces perpetual history. There's additional detail up here. You have your ACA employee information, so if you have to fill in that information, anyone doing ACA, you can also drill down into the monthly detail and see that as well. So that one's still available and functioning wonderfully. Renumbering and tax summary. So renumbering, everybody understands what renumbering is, but if you want to get into the tax summary, let's take a look at this. I can actually see federal, state, and local, if applicable, and then I can go into the detail. If I drill into the detail, I can actually move. Now this is just actually so cool. We've done a couple of live payrolls with another client, and when they wanted to go validate everything, we didn't have to run reports. We could come in here and just move around very comfortably, very freely, pulling up employee tax information, employer tax information, time worked. All the information that we would see in perpetual history is now at your fingertips. You also have the ability to drill down. So if we go into employee tax and we click on you and drill down, it breaks it down into more detail.
Sharon?
Yes, ma'am.
We have another question.
Okay.
Currently, we have earning and deduction codes set up for different employees. An example, some employees pay SBI, some pay FICA, some pay only Fed and state. Will these codes be lost, and will we have to set up new ones?
No, they will not. So they will not be lost, but we do have to configure them to use the appropriate tax rules and make sure that depending on how you have your employees set up, that they're calculating the way you expect. So you get to retain them. All we have to do is during the conversion process, go through the mapping with you to make sure that we have all the tax rules set up properly for the giving, earning, and deduction codes. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Beautiful. All right, we're getting there. So that gets us through this and this. Employee tax summary, let's go back here. That's our pay history, and I think that's it on the employee. Let's just quickly open up the payroll data entry and let you see what that screen looks like. Other than that, I think the rest is going to be fairly self-explanatory. So let's suppose I'm doing semi-monthly. If I do semi-monthly and I'm going to do a check run on the 1st, it assumes semi-monthly means that I'm going to end on the 15th. I can then pick my check date, which is going to be the 16th. This is demo data, so forgive me for that. So if I continue and I move along, same functions that you've seen before are still here. So manual taxes, etc., all this remains the same. The functionality has not changed. We say OK. If we want to automatically pay employees, that's fine. We have several people who are doing that and then importing off timesheets for their hourlies. Where are you? Auto pay. Why can't I see you? Oh, there you are. OK. And let's go in. Now that we're in, again, the lookups are all the same, but what's nice is you have drill down capabilities. Remember, anything blue and underlined means that I'm a hyperlink and I can jump into whatever location I'm going. So in this case, it would be employee. This is a master list of the employee numbers. And again, this is still the same. This gives you a list of everybody for who we actually created a timesheet entry. So let's just go ahead and pick somebody. We're going to go ahead and pick Lady. She set up for semi-monthly. Hendrick is assigned bi-weekly. All right, let's go back to our pay cycle. We'll make it bi-weekly. I just did one this morning, and they were semi-monthly. There we go. And OK. No. So let's go grab somebody. There we go. We'll do Lady Demo. And the screens, again, look and feel very similar to what you're used to. This information has not changed. Let's go down to the lines. There's your grid. This should look and feel like what you've seen in the other areas in the system. AP, AR, general ledger, sales order, purchase order. Depending on what modules you'll have, you'll recognize it, but the basic idea is still the same. And you can move fields around, so if I have myself up here and I've got a code 1, but I don't know what that is, I can drag and drop the fields, I can resize them, and so on. As you get your information entered, all this information, again, will roll right through the same workflows that you're used to. There's additional data at the bottom. You also have a toggle if you don't like this additional detail here. So let's just go put description code back. I can also go to a side-by-side view and move my screen so that we can see it a little better. And if that works better for you, so be it. Plug in all your information. You can actually do the deductions automatically. There are the deductions, accept, and run through your payroll run. The functionality, the workflow has not changed. The look and feel has changed. A lot of the configurations around taxes have changed, and the back end has changed with respect to the table structures, the reporting, and so on. So that is a dry run. I'm not going to continue through this process at this point in time because you are all very familiar with what to do with the payroll run, how to run the checks, how to run the direct deposit. None of that will have changed. So I'm going to go ahead and hit accept and close this. All right. Is there anything that I have not touched on or anything that somebody wants to see in particular? So any of the people who joined in on the meeting or Lynette, if I've missed anything, please chime in now. No? Danica, any additional feedback?
Not that I see. I think you covered a lot. So
is this taking a sip out a fire hose?
And thanks, and have a great Friday afternoon.
Okay, thank you all for joining.